The game you're about to see is the most stupid, appalling, disgusting and disgraceful exhibition of football possibly in the history of the game.
The face and voice of BBC Sport for a quarter of a century. A man who left an indelible imprint on sports broadcasting in this country, who shaped it for generations to come.
When I was growing up, David was on your screen most nights of the week. He was certainly there for the great big moments.
As soon as he got a microphone in front of him, you know, he was excited. And so everybody else watching was excited too.
Well, this is ridiculous. The Portuguese are torn apart.
He just seemed to always hit the mark. Even if it was just something like 1-0.
Clock! 1-0!
He was one of those commentators who was a sort of comforting feature in the background. And I think somebody you could trust.
Princess Anne becomes the first member of the royal family to compete in a TV quiz show.
That was an amazing coup for the BBC.
I can't believe this is happening.
I can't.
If David Coleman said you ran well and you got praise from him, then that was better than your coach saying that you ran well.
Sebastian Coe, back at his best, is the Olympic champion again.
There's times when you speak and there's times when you don't speak and there's times when you get emotional, and he timed it all to perfection. It was from the heart, that's why.
Now, I've heard a whisper that, in fact, you have agreed a new contract, but you haven't signed it yet. Is that true?
Well, I've not brought it along with me because I didn't have room in my case, in actual fact.
I remain in awe in many ways of his ability doing stuff that I couldn't possibly do.
There have been developments in the Olympic Village. There may now be more than 8 hostages in there. There may be as many as 10.
Just imagine an Olympic Games overshadowed by that kind of attack. It really was absolutely shocking, and no one had seen anything like it.
This is the moment they've been waiting for. Paul McCartney leading them off, John Lennon.
It was a time when a forceful man could make changes happen.
Now, if the World Cup is going to survive in its present form, something's got to be done about teams that play like this.
Could effectively make the rules on how to present television.
I mean, don't try and be bloody clever. Shoot it on one camera if necessary and keep the link camera covering me.
And see his successors follow them to this day.
I was in awe of him, as just about everybody else was at the BBC.
Goodall going for goal! And Goodall gets the goal!
A man who the sport of athletics owes a bigger debt to than any other single person in the world.
Paula wound it up then, and when she accelerated past the athletes, just for a moment it looked as if she might break, but no. And the athletes...
David's last big job was the Olympics from Sydney, with all the satellite feeds and computerized graphics and instant replays that we take so much for granted today. Television technology and David Coleman had grown up together. What a contrast all this was compared with his first live broadcast 45 years earlier.
Well, from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty good. 7-2 this afternoon, the Wolves against Manchester City, and they're on the way back. Well, this was the old...
David knew about athletics, partly because he'd been an athlete himself, a very good one. He won the prestigious Manchester Mile in 1949.
I first became aware of the Olympic Games listening to a radio set in 1936. I was 10 years old, and I've been fascinated by Olympic history ever since. I've now become part of it, but not the part I wanted. I was going to be the 1500 metre gold medalist, but I wasn't good enough.
He often talks about what had most impact on him, you know, as a person, and for him that was being in the army actually, because he was called up when he was 18. He was a PE instructor as well as working on the signals and things, and based in Kenya, so he had to grow up really fast. It taught him a lot of discipline in life, and you know, that stayed with him ever since.
There were no media studies courses in those days, he just got on with it. And at the tender age of 22, he'd become the editor of the County Press in Cheshire. He landed a job as a news assistant at BBC Birmingham in 1954 and made his first television appearance on Sports Special soon afterwards.
Good evening and welcome to this second edition of Sports Special, BBC Television's new Saturday night programme.
Well, our lineup tonight.
Those were the days when BBC announcers had such posh accents, they made even the Queen sound a little bit common.
Well, next we're calling on Birmingham. Up there, our reporter David Coleman is waiting to bring us the Midlands point of view.
But not David. He was a grammar school boy, an ordinary boy, with an extraordinary ability.
You know, the BBC in those days, people forget, it was a preserve of people who sat down in a dinner jacket and read the news. And up until the 60s, I wouldn't have been employed at the BBC with my accent as a doorman, never mind as a presenter. The 60s came along and changed everything, and that, along with it, David came in with that tsunami, if you like, of working class and low middle class kids who wandered and found a way into the BBC.
Although young Booth was making the goals, it was centre forward Roy Swinburne who was taking them. That's right, David, yes.
It's very, very important that, I mean, it's particularly nowadays, that, you know, you don't suggest that you're somehow the upper class twit, the officer in charge of proceedings, that you are that man of the people, that everyman, and he had that voice to perfection.
On Saturday of this week, Peterborough United, the non-league club, go along to Huddersfield Town, the second division club, to meet them in the 4th round of the FA Cup.
The first thing I knew about him was he was working as a journalist for the BBC in Birmingham. I think he did an interview with Danny Blanchflower, and I saw that and I thought, well, here's a man we need to bring down to London.
In 1958, he replaced Peter Dimmock as the presenter of the BBC's news Saturday afternoon programme Grandstand, and he was to stay in that job for 10 years. 10 hugely successful years.
Hello, in our programme today we have every one of the top international swimmers in Great Britain, including Anita Lounsborough.
He was broadcasting with the adrenaline sloshing around. It somehow had everybody sitting on the edges of their seats too, and so everybody was very sharp, everybody was very focused. Everybody was on their game all the time when David was broadcasting.
Hello. Well, although your clock at home may show a few seconds after 1 o'clock, Grandstand, in fact, begins some 6 hours earlier. Because
as well as live sport, Grandstand also dipped its toe into news, covering stories such as the Beatles returning to Britain from their triumphant tour of the United States in 1964.
Now this is the moment the fans have been waiting for. The Boeing 707 has pulled in on stand 15 right below Queen's building, and you can hear the screams in the background. This is the moment they've been waiting for. Paul McCartney leading them on, George Harrison on the left, John Lennon at the back, Ringo Starr.
I really thought he'd made it then. That for me was, you know, as a young girl, well, that was it. The Beatles, that was somewhere I did want to go, but I didn't have the opportunity, and he didn't get their autograph or anything, and I was so upset about that. But things like that never mattered to Dad. He just likes people and is interested in everything going on, but doesn't see fame.
Never before have scenes like these been seen at London Airport, apart from royal homecomings.
Even today, David still reckons that those programmes were the best sports news programmes that were ever made. And Grandstand was a programme that really was a pioneering one. And the skill David showed there was that he was able to link the live items so well, and at the same time give the news and the scores and the results as they happen.
Also during this afternoon, of course, we'll be having news from that other cup final, Rangers versus Celtic, and hope to bring you the latest news of the goals as they're scored. Well, now the news headlines, John Langham.
Well, I think anyone that watched sport had to be aware of it. He was the voice of sport on television, athletics, swimming. His knowledge was quite remarkable. But I suppose if you do it for 350 years like David did, you know, you're bound to gather something up over the years.
Very quickly, the latest football news. Rangers and Celtic still 1-1 with about a minute left for play. Wimbledon beating Sutton United 3-2 in the FA Amateur Cup final. Let's go through to the printer because I think the Scottish Cup final's gone through. There it is. They must be playing extra time. Celtic 1, Rangers 1.
David believed in homework, and he did his homework, and he obviously had a very retentive memory and wouldn't go into any programme or any set-up underprepared.
Bournemouth 0, Shrewsbury 0. That's in Division 3. Bournemouth now 24 home matches without defeat.
He invented final score, effectively. It had never been done before by anyone. It was mimicked by a few others, but none of them reached the standards that he did.
I mean, I watched Coleman in action on the teleprinter, giving the football results, was a delight. He was so skillful at that, so knowledgeable at that, that one just gazed in admiration, quite frankly.
Third division again, Brighton 1, Watford 4. Brighton remained third from the bottom. Watford's first away win in 11 matches.
His memory was second to none. And I'm not actually sure why he did it. Was it that important that Cowdenbeath hadn't scored an away goal for 15 matches? Was it that important? But somebody wanted to know.
Wraith establishing a remarkable record. They haven't won a home match in the whole season in the league.
Obviously, today, there are people that do this wonderfully well. But David, I think, was the first.
Side third from bottom. Every point means something to them. But
Before the technology came in to help him along. And when you're the first, I then guess everyone always wants to build on what has gone before.
This is the fourth division. Exeter 2, Chester 1. Now 3 points between those two clubs in the table. Exeter led Chester by 1 before that match. It's now stretched to 3.
Well, so now I say what a great honour it is to have you with us in the Grandstand studio.
Well, thank you very much. In Grandstand programmes, you can normally expect to watch the experts and the professionals performing in every kind of sporting contest.
Television was changing at a breakneck speed. Live broadcasts were becoming routine. He handled them with great aplomb.
You're a bit worried about the horse in the background.
Yeah, fella, he wants a bit of luck, get him this to get on with, and he can hold him while he's talking to you.
Fine, all right. Well, this is the winning trophy, in fact, is it?
Yeah, that's the winning trophy.
The risks of going live were only too obvious, with television recording still in its infancy. In this new broadcasting world, timing was everything.
Anyway, here's someone who's often seen, Peter O'Sullivan.
The big race we'll be seeing together today, the Victoria Cup.
And that should be the cue for Max Robertson to tell you all about them.
Yes, but first I think it'd be nice to meet, officially, the man who's probably best known in swimming circles this year.
We're covering the first 4 races on the card, the first one at 2 o'clock.
By now, the space age had arrived. Satellites were bouncing pictures from continent to continent, and David was relishing the new opportunities it gave him.
Oh, we're getting a rugby match and a fight, everything going in there. Well, how Ken Aston could possibly keep this game going, one dare hardly think. Chile versus Italy. This is the first time the two countries have met. We hope it will be the last. The national motto of Chile reads, by reason or by force. Today, the Chileans were prepared to be reasonable. The Italians only used force. And the result was a disaster for the World Cup.
They always say have an opinion. Dave was never short of an opinion. And actually it chimed publicly. You know, I'm sure there were people that used to get irritated, but they were normally from vested interests in sport. I think the public always actually quite like people that go on television and give an unvarnished view of what you're about to watch or what you've just seen.
Now, if the World Cup is going to survive in its present form, something's got to be done about teams that play like this. Indeed, after seeing the film tonight, you at home may well think that teams that play in this manner ought to be expelled immediately from the competition. Just see what you think. No attempt made to play the ball at all. That was Salvadori. And in fact, I think the game is over. Ken Aston on his way to the dressing room. I shouldn't think there's ever been a football match played like this in Chile or indeed anywhere else in the world.
The one thing I would say about David Coleman more than anything else was he was a success because he was an enthusiast. He loved football. He did love football, and of course he was at the stage where the world was suddenly concentrating on football.
As a football commentator, David pulled off the remarkable feat of combining his calm mastery of the art with the occasional touch of hysteria.
He must score! He must score! Well, this is ridiculous. The Portuguese are torn apart.
They wanted him to be more than a detached bystander, to feel that he was involved. His audience loved him for that.
Good evening. This is the hotel where England, the world football champions...
He was patently angry at the infamous detention by Colombia of England's captain, Bobby Moore, on a bogus charge of theft.
The situation is quite simply this. No England player or official will comment on any news from Colombia until Bobby Moore is safely in Mexico and back with the party.
My first ever memory of a World Cup was really England playing in Mexico in 1970. And that save from Gordon Banks, brilliantly commentated on by David Coleman.
Carlos Alberto. That's dangerous. Giardino. Already left Cooper standing. Kelly! What a save! Gordon Banks! And that's the save of the World Cup.
David just added presence to the big football occasion, whether it was the World Cup final or even, you know, our bigger match of the day moments. David's voice was the voice I will always remember in football.
And Shanks' army, this Liverpool side, swarming forward now. Keegan! Goals pay the rent, and Keegan does his share.
He once said to me, "Throw your homework away," which he didn't mean that literally, but what he meant was I was getting bogged down with too many facts and figures, whereas really all that mattered was what was going on the pitch, and all that required was for me to describe and interpret it. And these were great lessons that I learned from him.
Rooking breaking forward. Took the attention away from Keegan. There's the 1-2. And it's 3-1. And the Scots defence sliced the bar. George Wood buries his face in the Wembley turf in anguish, but he was left with nothing he could possibly do as the defence parted.
The first time I remember his persona coming across to me was as most Sunderland fans would probably remember, it was the 1973 Cup final. And I remember we won 1-0 against Leeds, running out into the street afterwards and meeting all my friends, and all of us were going, Porterfield, 1-0.
Porterfield, 1-0. Leeds are really pushing forward. Cherry, brilliant save, and Lorimer makes it 1-each. No. Astonishing. Bobby Kerr, the smallest captain surely ever to lay hands on this trophy. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Kent. And no wonder he kissed it.
He made the 1-0. I wouldn't know. That wasn't an attempt to imitate him, because I don't think anybody could. But people, if he didn't say it, they thought, what's happened to David? They expected it.
Trying to take on McNabb on the outside, he's round the back. Clock!
1-0, everyone said, 1-0, that's it, you know. So, Billy, oh, well, we'll wonder what he'd say when it's 2.
Best is up front. There he is, the defence split. Can he do it? He surely must. What a goal to score, and who could score it but George Best? With the skill, the timing, the confidence to take it on and on and on until the net was bare.
You don't win matches if you don't take chances, and he had such a distinctive phrase, and so that's how I remember David as the football commentator that we all listen to.
I remember the first thing I had to do was to go with him. He had a four-seater plane then on a Saturday, David Coleman, which took him from a little aerodrome in Buckinghamshire up to wherever the game was and flew him back in the evening. It was really quite amazing. He then went home for his supper and then came in to introduce Match of the Day, because of course he was a presenter as well as a commentator at that time.
One time he wrote his car off coming back from an interview in Northampton and turned his car over 8 times, put it on the side of the motorway, and came out with a scratch done and got a taxi back to the studio to do the programme. That's what he was like. It had to be done.
Driven wide. Yes!
In addition to being a good commentator, he was a very good interviewer, and a good interviewer at all levels, both of the performers and of those people who ran sport, because he cared for sport. He was interested in sport, and he understood sport.
Oh, there. Well, that looks very businesslike. It's Mickey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mickey who?
Well,
How long have you been boxing, Mickey?
about 6 months.
David was the master of many disciplines. His interviewing was opinionated, but informed. He knew that attitudes to broadcasting were changing as society changed, and he knew exactly what he could and could not get away with.
My last came number 1
because I've been slack in my religious beliefs. Been a Muslim, followed Elijah Muhammad, been an Islamic believer. I didn't pray like I should pray, and I didn't eat like I should eat, and going to certain parties and going to nightclubs and going places to help the promotion, which a religious person shouldn't be. I know where I was spanked.
Mohammed, surely the most important thing, though, from your point of view, in this case, is that your pride's been hurt.
This is what you say. I didn't say my pride's been hurt.
His interviewing technique was always good. He was never a waffler, David, and I think that's something I've very much learnt from him. Try not to talk too much. Let your guests do the talking.
Brian, we briefly touched upon the possibility of you getting a reputation as a very direct person. What do you like at home?
I think I'm quite normal in actual fact. To be a direct person is, you know, it's quite a compliment, David, because there's so many people not direct. I've mingled with politicians in my life, you know, and they're an absolute disgrace.
His interviewing skills were fluent, he listened carefully, he wasn't afraid to just interrupt if he had something to say. He wasn't, I have to say, not daunted by the prospect of interviewing very important people. That's because I think he had a great gift for putting people at ease.
I must say, I'm not terribly sure how to start this interview. Do we start by calling you Sir Alfred?
I should start at the beginning and carry on from where we left off on our previous meeting.
Well, I would like to say many congratulations, really sincere congratulations. It's one of the most popular recognitions for many years.
Very kind of you.
3 a.m. Wednesday, London Airport. And Britain's homesick soccer star, Jimmy Greaves, is back in the country he seems to miss so much, but left 8 days ago to honour his contract with Milan. Jimmy? Hello, Jimmy. Welcome back.
David, how are you?
What's the news?
What do you mean?
Well, it's reported this morning that you're not going back to Italy. Is that true?
No, not at the moment. I'm definitely booked a passage to go back on Friday.
And you're certainly going back, are you?
Well, I'm booked to go back, certainly.
He was a brave broadcaster as well as a talented one. You know, there wasn't anything he wasn't prepared to have a go at doing. He never backed off. It was always full on with David.
The big difference between then and now, apart from black and white television and the main and that sort of thing, was that the equipment was absolutely awful. I mean, you could hear the clunk of the cameras it changed then. Boing!
You got round the back of the defence twice. The first one was a classic, wasn't it, Callahan?
Well, the first one was from Callahan, and of course, Hughes making the...
Actually, with a bit of luck, we might rescue that, actually. Bill Shankly talking about the first one being a classic there. If I keep talking, we may be able to rescue that. You may remember that both the opening goals came through wingmen getting round the back of the defence.
But more than that, if you're presenting an autocue, it's printed on a toilet roll, and it would break regularly. You could guarantee it within 30 seconds it had gone. So you better be prepared for that. And David was that exemplary pro. He never went into anything without being properly prepared.
Now, Ringo, I hear you were manhandled at the embassy ball. Is this right?
Not really. Someone just cut a bit of my hair.
Let's have a look. We seem to have got plenty left.
Can you see the difference? It's longer this side.
What happened exactly?
I don't know. I was just talking, having an interview, just like I am now. I was talking away, and then there it goes. And I looked round. There's about 400 people just smiling. You see, we had that in the other programme. You know, so you can't blame. You know, what can you say?
What can you say?
Oh, tomorrow never knows.
George, how do you like being described as the Prime Minister's secret weapon?
It's
great, yeah. The thing is, I didn't get the bit where they said earning all these dollars for Britain, or like, are we sharing it out or something?
For a match that's not supposed to be very exciting, it's not bad, is it?
Much faster than I thought. I thought it would be dominated by the...
By now, the BBC was beginning to build its sports programming around David. In 1968, he fronted a new concept based on exploiting his challenging style.
I'd like to start straight away by asking you something that's most controversial.
Well, he could be a bit Robin Day-ish in his time. It's interesting. I mean, Sports Night with Coleman changed things a bit, because here for the first time was the man who was in charge of the programme was the presenter. If your name is on the title, you should have the last say.
Good evening. Tonight, the final of the commentators' competition. The BBC's nationwide search to find an extra commentator to join the BBC team when we cover the World Cup in Mexico next year.
When he was sat in the Sports Night with Coleman studio, you actually got the impression that he was probably producing, editing, commentating, presenting, doing everything from that one little seat.
It tells you something about what the BBC recognised. The BBC recognised that in putting his name in the title, millions and millions of viewers would recognise straight away what that brand was. It was not just any old sports programme, it was a sports programme fronted by one of the world's best sports broadcasters, David Coleman.
He was a hard man to avoid on the BBC, but the vast and growing sports audience seemed perfectly happy with that. He seemed to have his finger on the pulse of the sporting nation.
Fine, well, there you are. That's a really wonderful present there for you. 2 £4 stand tickets. If I give you the letter from the Cheltenham man, perhaps you'd like to write to him and thank him. Okay, hope you enjoy the match, and no doubt about Leicester City winning, no?
No, the Browns win.
It wasn't just his voice, of course. He was everywhere, wasn't he? Sports Night with Coleman. It just made it real. You know, it made it real to have him kind of commentating on it.
I'm getting a little tired about hearing about the magic of the Brazilians. Do you think we've really taken anything out of the World Cup? Have you learned anything from the World Cup?
Well, He would pin people. The days of sort of the soft soap of an interview, which actually we've almost got back into, was something he changed. He changed the rules. You know, if you went on that show and you were the international president of a sports federation, you either were very naive or stupid to go on there unbriefed. I've seen him absolutely take people apart, and he took pleasure in it.
Do you regard yourself as being tough?
No, I don't.
Well, this is just about the most representative and complete array of sportsmen ever assembled in this country. Top of the table, so to speak, last year's winner David Broom from show jumping. John Surtees, the Sports View personality.
The most eagerly awaited programme was Sports Review of the Year, and it was on this show that his confrontational style met its match.
Since you've been so successful, you find it so relaxing?
Not really, no. Only competitions aren't at all relaxing now.
Which section of the three-day event do you enjoy best?
The end.
Now, how much time have you got for training, and what do you do?
Well, normally speaking, I just rely on the amount of riding I managed to do to keep me fit, but on that particular occasion I didn't summon up enough energy to do some extra exercises.
We spend our life asking people's questions. I mean, we do it all the time. So being on the end of other people's questions is always, you know, you sort of slightly feel for them, but on the other hand, that's their business, you know, you supply the answers to the questions. But I think he probably subsequently may have thought it was rather foolish to ask me about what fitness work I did and didn't when I did my exercises. And I said I do them at night, and stopped. And he looked at me, and the people round about me then started to titter, and that was really the end of the interview.
So you actually got down to early morning training?
Actually, it was late at night.
His relationship with famous Olympians and the games themselves would eventually come to define his later years in broadcasting.
Now we only have a few moments to wait before the climax of the athletics events in Tokyo, and as we wait for what has been described as the best Olympic athletics ever, meet the girl who ran the race of her life yesterday. Ann Packer had 6 demanding days racing before her record-breaking 800 metres, and just after the race she spoke with David Coleman in Tokyo.
Well, now, as you came round into the straight, of course, the French girl, who's so good, was well clear. Did you really think you were going to catch her?
I think that moment I did, because I had no pain in my legs.
David always had a very personal approach to people that he was going to be talking about, and I think really that's why he was able to communicate so well to the public the sort of thoughts and feelings and ups and downs of a sportsman's career.
Well, Ann Packer now moving up on the outside. She's got to do a lot of running to get there, and she's doing it. Here she goes on the outside.
He was a very good athlete himself, and every other athlete who's been with him, known him, and worked with him, and run when he's commentated, will feel that the commentary that he did for them was the special one, and it was the special one because he delivered a lot of special ones.
No, I thought after I finished I'd give anything to hear Your boy's getting excited.
In fact, we're about to send the sound commentary over to London. I don't know if we can pick up the last part of it. Can we pick it up?
Well, the Nan Packer now moving up on the outside. She's got to do a lot of running to get there, and she's doing it. Here she goes on the outside, and here she comes on the outside. A tremendous run, and she's going to do it. Nan Packer's going to take the gold medal.
His voice was breaking, and people do remember his commentary more than they remember my race, I think.
Oh, what a consolation. Nan Packer wins. Do for her second. Oh, fantastic run.
Fantastic indeed, I must say. I nearly joined you in tears up there on the commentary board.
I've worked on the athletics and I've spoken to a lot of those retired, and they just say every time they look back at their greatest moment, their favourite moment, it's the words of David Coleman that just bring them to tears. He said it just wouldn't be the same if it wasn't with David Coleman.
He was a little bit of a mentor, really. We were able to talk to him about what we were doing in training, and he was always interested. And because of his knowledge, he was able to appreciate, how things were going for us.
Thanks very much, Dawn, for coming out and braking training.
Thank you very much, David, it gives us great pleasure to be back with you again.
David presented no fewer than 11 Olympic Games, from Rome in 1960 to Sydney in 2000.
But they've been all over the place in this race. It's been a running battle.
But undoubtedly his most challenging broadcast was Munich in 1972.
There's now a total security clampdown on the Olympic Village.
He was on air for several hours, live and unscripted, during one of the most harrowing episodes in sporting history.
I don't think there's any question that what was such a tragedy was certainly David's finest hour as a broadcaster, because he had nothing to talk about for the better part of a day, and yet he made it all work.
And I remember very, very clearly sitting there, marveling at it, because I did think, oh, it's true, if you put yourself in that situation, what do you do now? He didn't have any help, for whatever reason, I just don't know why, but he was there as the sole eyewitness of that extraordinary event, and he was brilliant.
The general opinion seemed to be that things would start happening tonight, and the general impression has been, too, that the Germans were extremely anxious to settle.
Well, I was in Munich with him when that happened. I was doing another sport, obviously, and the way Coleman came into the studio and just grasped the significance of that event was quite an education. And of course, he sat there for hours commentating on the developing scene as to what was going to happen to these hostages.
And we'll have to let you know later on during this program exactly what's happened.
It was the rest day in track and field, and I'd gone to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, looking forward to a day off. And there was a sudden pounding on the door, and I looked at the watch. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, and the door was shaking. And I said something very rude, and it's my day off. And it was the late Ron Pickering shouting, "David, you've got to wake up. They need you." Some Israelis have been killed. We think Arabs are responsible. They're holding Israelis hostage in there, and they're threatening to murder somebody every 1 or 2 hours. I remember looking at the clock with a minute to go, and everything was so still in the studio. And we started the countdown from a minute out, and kept my eye on the big clock, and Paul Fox came through to me on the headphone. He said, "David, you may well be taken off the air. The security people have been on. We understand the terrorists are listening to you in the Israeli bloc."
These are live pictures of the Israeli bloc. It's now 20 seconds before 12 o'clock.
I couldn't do anything about it if we were taken off the air by the security people. And we never established, in fact, whether they knew what was going on, the terrorists. And I remember, as studio clocks do, the finger shivering second by second as it ticked round. And it seemed almost, in tune with the moment. As we waited for the attack, it didn't happen.
And I hear that at this moment, the helicopters are lifting off the special pad in the Olympic Village where they've been standing since this afternoon. And that is the helicopter.
It appeared that exchange was in progress, except that we heard some shots had been fired. In the end, it turned out there were 11 members, including the 2 who had been killed in the apartment block, and 9 at the airport. 11 members of the Israeli team. There was a policeman and 5 terrorists. It was a very, very uncertain and unreal occasion.
The Olympic Games stand still. The flags in the stadium at half-mast. The citizens of Munich, the thousands of competitors and officials, bewildered and appalled.
He got so much credit for how he dealt with that situation, being just a sports journalist to a lot of people. But again, it was his basic training and his basic instinct and the fact that he's so well read, that he has the voice to deliver emotion that made what he did quite special.
This hastily conceived memorial ceremony, conceived yesterday for the 2 dead Israelis, but now embracing the men who died last night in the bloody chaos at Fürstenfeld Airport.
Let's be clear, what happened back in 1972 at those Olympic Games in Munich was one of the biggest atrocities that we've ever seen at a big international sporting event. Maybe we need to think about more recent atrocities that we've known, which have made a gigantic impact on our national consciousness. Well, just imagine an Olympic Games overshadowed by that kind of attack. It really was absolutely shocking, and no one had seen anything like it before.
But it wasn't very easy going on with it. And I asked to be excused from some of the events the next day, some of the heats. I did the main finals. You have to go on working. It's your job. I had to go on commentating. But I never really did feel in tune with the games during the next few days. And the closing was especially difficult.
Above the stadium, shining very brightly in this darkness, a gigantic man-made rainbow. This replacing the traditional fireworks that normally signal the end of the Olympic Games.
Munich was really the first time that I really watched an Olympic Games, because this was the sport I was involved in. And again, it was, you know, sadly, I have to say it was a sublime piece of observation, not a commentary, it was an observation.
Today, people might say, well, why would you have a sports commentator actually commentating on this kind of terrorist atrocity? You might not expect that. What they don't realise is, of course, that David, with his journalistic background, was ideally equipped.
The Olympic final underway, Wells got away well, and also going well is Laura, and on the far side, Leonard, and an accident.
David, for all his enthusiasm, which could border on hysteria at times.
But it's Wells on the near side for Great Britain. Leonard and Wells absolutely together.
For all his enthusiasm and all that, he was reported it as he saw it. And that's really the example that still would carry today, and still people today doing this job on television should actually look at and learn from.
The final of the 800 metres, and Guimarães of Brazil has gone storming off.
Fittingly for a man who'd excelled at running in his youth, David probably reached his peak as a commentator just as British middle-distance running was reaching its peak.
For me, in 1980 in Moscow, having seen the 800 metres, and I said, what about that 800 metres? Wasn't it fantastic? What about Ovett? I said, did you see him? His concentration in his eyes going down the back straight. And he said, oh yeah, you've heard my commentary. I said, no, what do you mean I've heard your commentary?
Steve Ovett in 4th place. Those blue eyes like chips of ice.
And here was the commentator picking out and encapsulating it with just one of the great lines, and he knew what he meant. His eyes like chips of ice.
And Coe's got an awful lot to do. He's coming from a long way back, but they've been all over the place in this race. It's been a running battle. Sebastian Coe leaves the arena in disappointment as his great rival, Steve Abett, celebrates.
He was never short of giving you advice. I remember returning from the 1994, I think they were, the Commonwealth Games in Victoria in Canada, sitting next to him on the flight, and halfway through the flight, actually taking me to task for the way I ran the 800 metres, you know, so 14 years earlier.
And could this be Owen's first defeat? Owen is in trouble, and Coe gets the revenge he wants. And what a comeback for Sebastian Coe. Hardly anyone would tip him for this race, but you don't become a bad athlete in a week.
So David was never short of advice in any number of areas. Actually, in fairness, usually accurate too.
But cruises away, and he's not going to be caught.
He really has got a love for the sport, and of course, you know, a love of all things British, and he always wanted us to do really well, and it came across.
Cruz wins, Coe's second.
He wasn't so much that he was being biased towards us. I think that he just, you know, wanted us all to do really well at whatever level we were at.
Sebastian Coe, back at his best, is the Olympic champion again.
In those moments away from his broadcasting role, sitting in a hotel lobby or restaurant, that's where his real love of it came out. You know, he'd be talking about, you know, and he should have done this and he should have done that and this should have happened and why isn't he, you know, and he's not coached properly, and he, you know, and you'd sit and listen to this and you go, God, this guy really knows what he's talking about.
This time they got a bit unsteady. Christie got a good one, also good one, steady.
Yeah, I mean, he was excited. I mean, you know, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Christie comes storming through. It's Linford Christie.
And you hear his voice and the tone and everything else.
And the British captain is the Olympic champion. The greatest prize in sport.
He was sort of like genuinely excited and happy and pleased that I won.
The fastest man in the world in 1992.
Myself, Sally Gunnell, he always talked about us, which was, you know, pretty good.
Sally Gunnell's gone very quickly into the first hurdle, the first to rise. Right on the outside is Letta Skye, the world champion.
I saw him in the company of many great and legendary sports people, you know, from Sebastian Coe, Brenda Foster, right the way through Bobby Charlton, all the footballers. Not one of them had anything but total respect for Coleman.
And it's Sally Gunnell now with one to go. Gunnell leads and goes for it. And she gets it right. Michael Johnson, one of the greatest Olympic athletes in history. Goal for Freeman. And Holmes has been caught by that break.
At his last Olympic Games, he found himself commentating alongside some of the athletes he had helped to bring to prominence.
And Cran leading with Scott coming and Owena coming. And Cran has got it. He's 3 yards clear.
When I first sat down next to David in the commentary box, there is nobody bigger. There hasn't been anybody bigger in terms of sports broadcasting. So to say I felt inferior would be an understatement.
Well, around the national winners' enclosure here at Aintree, a great deal of excitement about the Liverpool-Manchester United match, of course. A lot of Liverpool supporters knocking around here. The latest score we had was 1 each, but here now, reporting from Manchester, is Barry Davis.
BBC Sport was nothing like as tolerant with each other as they are now. In fact, it was quite the reverse.
What do you want to do now? Say clearly what you want to do now.
To say it was hostile, people might sort of cringe at that word, but it was in many ways, and words were exchanged and people called each other all sorts of names that now they'd have the recipient run into the Human Resources Department in 5 seconds.
Just have the First Division scores there ready to turn over. David, no score.
Accepted the fact that there was an editor of the programme, but always made it quite clear that his editorial views should be taken into account. That's putting it politely.
He was very demanding of editors and producers, and if the camera wasn't in the right place or the sound wasn't right, they would know about it. They would get the sharp end of his tongue.
Keep your camera still now, bloody chattering all the way through it. Get your bloody finger out. And leave your cameras in the same position. You've got one bloody zoom on there, you can cover it. I've never seen such a bloody carnival in my life.
The truth? David in the commentary box was the boss, and the thing was, it was like you were playing, when you played with him in the commentary box, you were playing for the best team.
First day I joined the BBC to commentate, and I was really nervous. Indoor meeting at Birmingham, and I went to turn up there, and I knew how the reputation he had for how precious he was in the comp box around, you know, how it was. And I was kind of edging my way, and he just went, "Crammy, sit here, you're next to me," boom, you know. And that's where I sat for the next sort of 3 seasons, next to David, you know, and it was like, you know, he was in charge of me, as it were, and was going to make sure that I was looked after, and nothing was going to happen to me, and I had no reason to be frightened or scared.
He looked at everybody around him as part of a team, and if anybody else from the outside would criticise that, you know, that team, he would defend you to the hilt. At the same time, within that team, if you did anything wrong, you'd be the first to know about it.
I think the relationships were obviously very, very mature there, and there were some people there who'd been there a long time with David and knew him very well. There were other people who hadn't been there so long, and I realised certain parts of the production staff were fearful of him, you know, really fearful of him, about upsetting him, about, you know.
I did get rather terrified of him, because obviously, you know, he was a very exacting person in what he wanted, and you know, he wasn't somebody that suffered fools gladly. I'm sure other people have said that.
And a very important attempt, Stuart.
I was sat down at the 1991 World Championships in Tokyo, and David leaned over and pulled my headphone just from the side of my ear and whispered, "Bob Beeman's record that has stood for so long is now consigned to the history books." And, or words to that effect. And that's pretty much what I said. And David just, again, thumbs up and smiled. You know, he was very giving. He wasn't a selfish man at all. But if you got it wrong, phew, woe betide. You got a tongue lashing from Mr. David Coleman.
But the rants were for a reason. He wanted what he was in front of to be correct. And if it wasn't correct, he wouldn't do it. It's as simple as that. It's like everything we do in our lives as children, that's the one thing that we've been taught: do it properly, or don't do it at all. And he was right, and it wasn't personal. And he'd always get up to the boys, the crew and the riggers and the sparks, go and have a cup of tea with them, and be one of the lads. It wasn't personal.
There were legendary stories about David and his temper, particularly working with Brian Cowgill, Ginger Cowgill, who had got a formidable temper too. And wonderful stories told of just before they were going on there, he and David at it, hammer and tongs, calling each other all kinds of terrible names. You did, good evening from Goodwood. I mean, it was absolutely like that. He switched like a light being switched.
Question of Sport was conceived as a regional show for Manchester in 1968. It just might work, they thought. And how? It was a huge hit. BBC One eventually grabbed it, and they've never let it go. And the Coleman career took yet another trajectory.
Hello, welcome to Question of Sport, with Ali McCoist leading John Barrett by 5 rounds to 2.
Home, please.
Oh. Name the last player to beat Bjorn Borg in the Wimbledon singles.
Home!
Oh!
You know, Question of Sport was always on TV, and you always wanted to be on it. Away from the track, everyone looked forward to having a go, and Dave was, you know, presenting it, and he had a lot of jokes.
None of the team captains ever used to go for their own sport. They'd always used to go for away, because David would absolutely rip you apart if you didn't get your rugby question right, or with Ian Botham's case, your cricket question right.
This is the numbers board, of course, and all you've got to do is pick a number and then recognise the person.
Number 6, please, David.
What David would do, Emery would say, "I think I know it's the Irish jockey," and David would be going, "Yeah, behind the camera, yeah, I'm sure." It just egging him on a bit.
Oh, I know who that is. It's John Reid, the jockey.
John Reid?
Are you sure, Evelyn? Is that your final?
Who is it? Princess Anne.
Oh, God, it's not, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
No, I can't. I said, I'll get beheaded for this.
Obviously, I looked at it, I thought, no, it looks a bit like Princess Anne, and David was like nodding his head, so I said, well, it's Princess Anne. And we didn't know that a Royal Highness was coming on the following week.
I'd just ridden in a race at Cheltenham, and everybody looked like that, because if you weren't in front all the way round, it was absolutely filthy. And frankly, you know, if I hadn't recognised the colours, I don't think I'd have recognised myself, so I wouldn't have blamed anybody else for not recognising me.
It's Princess Anne.
He had the ability to get everybody just to enjoy it, and I think his touch beforehand in terms of getting people to relax and feel they were very much part of the team, and that it was very much just a game, you know, was essential, to be honest, because with a couple of captains like that, he could have got overwhelmed, I think.
Who at Burley in 1974 became America's first world individual three-day event champion?
Bruce Davidson.
Bruce Davidson.
Good stuff.
One of the things that helped us gel together is the fact that we both had this love of sport, and we used to watch it even when we weren't working, you know. So yeah, we had a fair bit in common.
The sports personalities they had on, you know, had to have won something and be at a certain standard, and I think my father was quite keen on that. But no, it was great fun. It was quite a family-orientated show that we used to go to when they were filming in London with our own families. We used to have Sunday lunch fast with all the crew and all the different guests, because they brought their families along. So it was a nice time. It was a time for my children, actually, to enjoy his broadcasting.
In 1996, he decided that this would be his last year.
Smithy, nice to see you.
He spoke to the producer and said, I want Sue to do it because of my background in sport, and he had his background in running.
What I think is that the lad he's gone back in, and the lad he's broke down in tears, and the other lad...
You know you've hit the big time with a show when it becomes the object of popular satire.
I see. So that's what you think happened.
Yeah, that's what happened, yeah.
Yeah, you think he came in, brought down in tears.
That's what happened.
That's what you think happened next.
Yes.
You don't want to change your mind.
No, that is what happened.
You're sticking to that
Yes.
answer. I see. Well, Emlyn, you are absolutely right on.
Question of Sport was and is the iconic showpiece for the entertainment side of sport, and was much parodied for David's capacity for his on-air gaffes.
Quite extraordinary. And what in fact happened was I heard the signature tune and automatically assumed it was the end of the programme.
If that ball across the line, it would have been a goal and all that sort of stuff which used to go on. But again, you see, you're allowed that in my view. I mean, it is a tough job.
I'll tell you about the noise in just a moment. And some news.
Forget to ask me about his shirt.
Ah, yes. Well, that's Cliff Morgan telling me not to forget to ask someone behind me about his shirt. Well, I'll just tell you about that in a moment or so. Well, it's all going on here. Why did you come from behind my back? I mean, all the best things in television you never see at home.
And the trouble is that his were perhaps more obvious, more people spotted them, they became better known.
My guess is that it's a stick of dynamite. No, it's not.
Remarkable.
Which was unfortunate, because when you think about the amount of time he spent commentating, he's actually pretty good.
You may have seen slow motion videotape recording before, but now we can have a look at it for the first time. We've used it in this country. So let's take them through there. Now Nash in the dark kit is clearly the winner. If we can move them through now and check their placings. I'm sorry about that, because as you might have gathered, we've not used that machine very often, and we need a bit of practice. But we will perhaps be able to check later on just how those boys finished.
No, I think he enjoyed it deep down. I think he might have had a whinge and a moan occasionally when he got hammered, but no, I think he quite enjoyed it. I think it was all became part of the show. In fact, this didn't always come out on the show, but if he'd said something and didn't get it quite right, and we had to do it again, he would look at us and go, hold the ball.
Well, the question, of course, at round 5 is when the action stops, what happened next? Good evening, and tonight we combine the first day of competition at the Moscow Olympic Games with the highlights of the fourth and
He was often the butt of comedians, almost always
Moscow,
affectionate.
5 gold
But his
medals won,
knowledge,
with
his
several Britons
commitment,
in the finals,
his professionalism
and Muirfield at
won
one of
him
the
the
most treasured
respect
titles
of
in the
viewers
sporting world
and his
today.
peers,
That's where we
reflected
start,
in the
and Harry
many
Clark
awards
sets the
and honours that came his way.
Well, David, as you probably know, we had the first time we finished in districts today for the Open Challenge. And when we got here this morning at Muirfield, the weather was completely different from yesterday.
I think most people
towards the end of his career will remember his track and field in an Olympic arena. And I think his editorial instincts and the way he changed sports presentation, for me, are the things that I will remember him for. There will not be another David Coleman.
What David was always that critical observer. Loved the sport, loved the people who played it, as I do, but reserved the right to actually say, no, that's not right. And that's what's gone. And that's the greatest problem I see today in replacing David Coleman.
This first London Marathon, even before it started, is surely already the most remarkable success.
That was a surprise. Did you spend overnight printing that all up yourself, did you? I didn't know I got relatives in there.
If your first car was a Rolls Royce, you wouldn't know that that wasn't the standard. And it was only when I listened to his commentaries, when I saw him in action, that I realised I was sitting next to a Rolls Royce.
If you look at his passport, it'll say journalist. It won't say commentator or presenter or anchorman, yet he was all those things. It was his journalistic background and his journalistic training that made him so valuable to us in the BBC and to the audience at home, because they understood that here was a top professional at work, and not just a pretty face.
There's been a great deal of controversy and criticism about the method of selecting the team. Two of our best golfers, Wheatman and Brown, are not yet in. One of them certainly won't be in. Do you agree with the method of selection?
He just set such a high bar because there were so many great commentators in that era, and I think they had to raise the bar because, you know, David was so good.
I think it would be probably not quite fair on him just to pick out the one thing and say that's what he'll be remembered for. I think he'll be remembered for 30 years and more of absolute top-class broadcasting, not just in its own right, but in the way it influenced other people in the generation that came later, of which I counted myself to be very fortunate to be one.
So two of the favourite athletes are out of it now.
What a shame.
I mean, everyone knew the voice. He's just had this really distinctive, you know, tone about his voice, and talk of the team was, you know, you want to be there where Dave Coleman commentates, you know, on one of your races.
Just having people of the stature of David Coleman taking an interest meant that, you know, I was obviously doing something right.
If David Coleman says you ran well and you got praise from him, then that was better than your coach saying that you ran well, which isn't right really, but as a 17, 18-year-old, that's how it felt.
As they come down the straight now, they can see the one lap marker at the end of the straight. So
We all knew that David was going to leave the BBC, and we wanted to give him the most glorious send-off because he had touched all of our lives in one way or another. And he didn't want that, but I guess that is the man he is. He didn't want a big send-off. He didn't want to be patted on the back and sent on his way. When you've loved something so much, to actually give it away is the hardest decision of all.
The passion for sport runs strong throughout David's family. He's proud of that.
Who's that? Is it Grandad? Yeah. Say Grandad. He's young there. May 69, that was. Yeah. It was.
You were allowed home from school, weren't you? The following day.
He's got a lot else to be proud of too.
Irreplaceable.
It was as good in Sydney as he was at the first Olympic Games televised from Rome in 1960. 40 years of Olympic Games, that's some record to be proud of.
Hello, good morning, George.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
He was always there, always willing to help.
Well, hello, Mr. Stimson. Nice to see you. Now, I suppose, as chairman of the local football club, Saturday will be a great day in your life.
Certainly will.
Ultimate professional.
Well, now, among the 100,000 interested and excited spectators at today's Cup final is the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Harold Wilson. Very nice of you to spare the time and miss the half-time cup of tea, sir.
And a first-rate journalist.
It's happening, Great Britain! It's happening, Great Britain! Happening with one barrier to go!
A legendary broadcaster.
And she's going to do it! Anne Packer's going to take the gold medal! It's Anne Packer, Great Britain! Oh, what a consolation! Anne Packer wins, Dupera second, Chamberlain third,
and she's done it, and Backer. Oh, fantastic run.
He's been retired for 11 years now, and things have inevitably moved on. But he left his mark, and two generations of viewers will remember him for helping sports broadcasting come of age.